The last type of bar we're going to see in this lesson is what we call the side-by-side bar graph. Before we talk about how to create this type of graph, we need to talk about contingency tables. Why? Because we need to organize the data set using a contingency table before we can create a side-by-side bar graph. Okay. A contingency table is a table where each row represents categories of one variable and each column represents categories of another variable. We're going to use the example below to learn how to construct contingency tables and side-by-side bar graphs. Okay. The table below contains information about the home ownership status of 10,000 randomly sampled loan borrowers. The table summarizes two variables. One is going to be the application type. We have two different categories for this qualitative variable. One being individual, meaning that the loan borrower applied for the loan by themselves. The second one being joint, meaning that the loan borrower applied for a loan together with someone else. So notice here is one of the variables. This variable is the application type. And so again, on a contingency table, you're going to see the categories of one variable being represented on each row. Now, the second variable is the home ownership status. And so notice here on the columns, we have rent, mortgage, and own. Those are the three categories for this variable. So I'm just going to do an arrow here. So I'm going to do an arrow here. Again, this is variable title home ownership. Okay. And again, that variable has three different categories. We're using a contingency table because we're keeping track of two different qualitative variables, okay? When we were talking about frequency tables and relative frequency tables, we were keeping track of one variable. Looking at the contingency table, what do we see? Well, notice we have 3,496 loan borrowers who are applying for the loan by themselves. So they're under the individual category for that application type, and they rent their home. We can look at another cell. For example, we can look at this cell here, 950. We know that 950 loan borrowers are applying for a joint loan. Notice they are within the second row. We also know that these 950 borrowers have a mortgage for their home. Okay, and so that is how we read a contingency table. We can go ahead and go through each of these. So for example, let me do one more. We know that 1,170 loan borrowers own their home and are applying for a loan by themselves. So an individual application. Now, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to finish the table by entering the total for each column and row. Okay. And so since we have been using Google Sheets, I'm going to go ahead and use Google Sheets to do this faster. So let me go ahead and copy the table. On Google Sheets, I'm going to open a new sheet and I'm going to paste the table. Google Sheets lets you add values. You simply have to highlight the values that you're trying to add. So notice here, 3,496 and 362, those are being highlighted. If I add these two values, I'm going to have the total number of individuals that rent their home. Once you highlight them, here at the bottom right corner, you're going to see the sum of those cells. So the sum of those two values is 3,858. And you can go ahead and type the sum on Excel, or you can go ahead and write it on your notes. Okay. Again, same thing with the next column. We can go ahead and add the values under mortgage to see how many people, how many individuals are within this category. If we go ahead and highlight those values, we can see at the bottom right corner that we have 4,789 individuals in this category. Do the same with the next category. How many people own their home? We have 1,353. Now let's go ahead and get the total for the first row. Let's highlight the values within that row. We have 8,505. What does this number represent? This represents the number of people who are applying for an individual loan, okay, or applying for a loan by themselves. Okay. And then the last one we need is the total for the second row. Let's go ahead and highlight those. You should be getting 1,495. Now one thing to mention is that if I go ahead and add the total number of people that rent a home, the total number of people that have a mortgage on their home, and the total number of people that own their home, I should be getting 10,000. We have 10,000 individuals in the sample. Okay. Now, if I add the total number of people who apply for an individual loan and the total number of people that applied for a joint loan, I should be getting 10,000. Why? Because there's 10,000 people in the sample. Okay. So go ahead and write those values on your activity. One thing to emphasize is that it's important to have the total for each category, because then we can answer questions like, how many people rent a home? We would say, out of the 10,000 people in the sample, we have 3,858 people that rent a home. Okay? So you can answer those type of questions. How many people landed within each category? Okay. Now, the next thing we're going to do, we're going to use Google Sheets, or you can also use Excel, to create a side-by-side chart. So let's go back to Google Sheets. Okay. When we create the side-by-side chart, we're now going to highlight the total. Again, the total was for us to see how many individuals land within each category. Next, we're going to click on Insert, and we're going to click on Chart. And notice Google Sheets knows that we need a side-by-side bar graph. It's already given it to us. If not, you would be able to go in here and look for the column graph. And so notice, on the x-axis, we have the categories rent, mortgage, and own. On the y-axis, we have the frequency for each of those categories. Now, under rent, we have two different bars. One of the bars represents the number of people that applied for an individual loan. The other bar that we see under rent represents the number of people that rent a home and apply for a joint loan. Within each category, within rent, mortgage, and own, we see two different bars. And that is how we're able to display both variables. Okay. Now, again, we can go ahead and change the title of our graph. Let's go ahead and write type of loan application versus home ownership status. And again, we can make the title darker. We can center the title. Notice there's one thing that is missing. We're missing titles on the x-axis and the y-axis. To fix that, you can click on Chart and Axis Titles and go ahead and look for the horizontal axis title. Okay. The horizontal axis is the x-axis. We're going to write home ownership status. Now let's go ahead and add a title for the vertical axis. This is the y-axis, and here we're just going to type frequency. And there you have it. Now you have titles on the x-axis and the y-axis. Again, we're using the x-axis to display the home ownership status variable. We're using two different bars within each of those categories to display the type of loan application. This is how you create a side-by-side bar graph. Again, you can go ahead and copy this graph and you can paste it into your notes. Okay. So now, the question here is, why do we need to use a side-by-side bar chart? How do you know that we're not supposed to use a pie chart or that we're not supposed to use a bar chart? I want you to answer that question. Yeah. Now, this is the end of our lesson. Again, go back to the learning objectives. Ask yourself, did I accomplish the learning objectives? Can I go find problems from WAMAP, problems from my textbook that can help me practice these learning objectives? One thing to mention is that when I'm creating exams for this class, I'm going to be looking at the list of learning objectives, and I'm going to be creating examples to assess your understanding of the learning objectives.